Ave Maria Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Elite Church of Christ, and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the Star Quest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 269. We're covering Ad Gentes 38 on the bishop's task in evangelizing. So we're going to talk about bishops today and what they do for evangelization, for missions. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about how we begin in local communities and are united with missionaries through prayer. Today we're going to continue chapter 6, cooperation, and we're going to talk about how bishops have a key role in promoting and helping missions around the world. This paragraph has 7 subparagraphs taking on the different aspects of the bishop's role. So let's summarize them. A, all bishops are part of one body and should have concern for the whole. B, each bishop promotes missionary zeal in his diocese. C, bishops should raise up those who will pray and work for missions in his diocese. D and E, bishops should send good priests to missions. F, bishops' conferences should support missions. And G, we should have ministry to migrants, including non-Catholics, including those we can evangelize to bring as a mission territory. So, again, 738A, all bishops are part of one body and should have a concern for the whole. Let's read it. A, all bishops, as members of the body of bishops succeeding to the College of the Apostles, are consecrated not just for some one diocese, but for the salvation of the entire world. The mandate of Christ to preach the gospel to every creature, Mark 16, primarily and immediately concerns them with Peter and under Peter. Whence there arises that communion and cooperation of the churches, which is so necessary today for carrying out the work of evangelization. In virtue of this communion, the individual churches bear the burden of care for them all and make their necessities known to one another and exchange mutual communications regarding their affairs, since the extension of the body of Christ is the duty of the whole College of Bishops. So this paragraph goes back to all these documents we talked about, Bishops, Christus Dominus, and Lumen Gentium. And so we are really talking about the college, that they are all one college of bishops. They're all united, and they are united with Peter and under Peter. Peter being the Pope, obviously, here in reference, so they're united with the Pope. So that idea of bishops being in that one college, and so they should have a care for the universal church. Obviously, bishops have to have care for their own diocese primarily, and that shouldn't change, but they should have some care for the universal church. And here we talk about communication and cooperation, make their necessities known. They have to establish, the established churches need to help the missionary ones. Like if you're starting on a mission in, let's say like Laos or something like that, you're going to need a lot of help from other dioceses because you probably don't have the money from the very few Laotian Christians and things like that. And so all this leads bishops to preach the gospel to every creature as they're called to do. So B is pretty short. Each bishop should promote missionary zeal in his diocese. Let's read it. In his own diocese, with which he constitutes one unit, the bishop, stimulating, promoting, directing the work of the missions, makes the mission spirit and zeal of the people of God present and, as it were, visible, so that the whole diocese becomes missionary. We start off here with this idea that bishop has that authority in his diocese. He's the one in charge of the diocese. It's true there. And he needs to imbue that diocese with missionary zeal. How many of our dioceses are really excited about missions, really excited about, hey, we need to go and evangelize the people in other parts of the world. Hey, we need to send money. Hey, we need to help them out financially, things like that. And that's a really important thing to do because we are not just caring for our own local area. Now, obviously, there can be missionary activity within the local area because you have a good portion of the population who are now post-Christian or some kind of atheist or something like that. And they really need to be evangelized. And there is a certain degree of evangelization to other Christians. Most of us live in Protestant-dominant countries, at least historically Protestant-dominant. They may be atheist-dominant today, a lot of these countries, at least the English-speaking world. You think of England, Canada, U.S., Australia, New Zealand, all that way. Ireland, a little different, but those are the main English-speaking countries I would think of that I think most of my audience lives in. And so, moving on to 38C, bishops should raise up those who will pray and work for missions from his diocese. So let's read it. C, it will be the bishop's task to raise up from among his own people, especially the sick and those oppressed by hardship, some souls to offer prayers and penance to God with a wide open heart for the evangelization of the world. The bishop will also gladly encourage youths and clerics who have their vocations to mission institutes, accept it with a grateful spirit if God should call some of them to be employed in the mission activity of the church. The bishop will exhort and help diocesan congregations to play a role in their own missions. He will promote the works of mission institutes among his own faithful, but especially among the papal mission works. For it is only the right to give these works pride of place, since they are the means of imbuing Catholics from the very infancy with a real universal and missionary outlook. And they are also the means of making an effective collection of funds to subsidize all missions, each according to its needs. This paragraph starts with interesting things talking about the sick and infirm and other ones who suffer difficulties and asking them to pray. This is an important role we have in the church, that idea of prayer for mission, that idea of praying for the church. It's very impressive to see the communities, especially religious communities who are dedicated full-time to prayer. Those, you see so many holy sisters and monks and things like that. Well, technically nuns, those are not sisters, those are nuns and monks. And we see them and they really pray for the world. And you can have that among lay people. Sometimes they're sick or difficulty. Sometimes they can't go to a community. Sometimes you'll have a person who, due to their illness, that can't really be cared for in a contemplative community, and they have to live on their own and pray on their own. And we need to encourage, a bishop needs to encourage missionary vocation among the youth of his diocese. A bishop should not just, and their vocation director should not just have vocations for his diocese. Yes, he's going to have a lot of vocations who are diocesan priests, who are local religious communities who are going to help out in his diocese, but we need to have missionary vocations. We need to have vocations that go out, go forth. I know for myself, even though my community is not missionary strictly in the strict sense, we do have the sense that we're not usually back in our hometown or back in our home country, at least for us as Canadians and things like that. And I know for certain members of my family, it was difficult that I was going to be leaving Canada. I have a relative who was very much like, great, you'd have a vocation, but why not stay in Canada? We need lots of priests here. And that's not like a totally wrong attitude for a person to have. This person's a good Catholic, everything else. But this idea is that we need missionary vocations as well, and bishops need to promote it. Not just vocations for their own diocese, not just looking inwardly, but also looking outwardly. And there needs to have that pride of place for missions. It's an important work in the church. This is important. We should not just say, hey, missions, some kind of extra things. No, missions are an important, essential work of the church, and we need to be ready for it. Bishops need to promote it. Bishops need to let young men join mission communities and promote all those ways so that we will really spread the faith more widely and not just in this local area, which obviously is the main concern of a bishop. So moving on to paragraphs D and E, bishops should send good priests to missions. So this is kind of related to this idea of vocations, but also to think about diocesan priests who ask to go to missions, because certain diocesan priests will ask to go to missions or ask to go to military chaplaincy or things like that. And that is a challenge for bishops, which ones of these they accept. And so this document is talking about those asked to go missionary vocations. So let's read it and then let's talk about it. D. Since the need for workers in the vineyard of the Lord is growing day to day, and diocesan priests have expressed the wish to play an ever greater part in the evangelization of the world, this sacred synod desires that the bishops, considering the very serious dearth of priests, which is hindering the evangelization of many areas, should send some of their better priests who offer themselves for the mission work and have received a suitable preparation to those dioceses which are lacking clergy, where at least for a time they will exercise their missionary ministry in a spirit of service. E. But in order that the mission activity of the bishops may be exercised more effectively for the good of the whole church, it would be expected for the episcopal conferences to take charge of those affairs which concern the orderly cooperation of their own region. So, what we have here is this idea that some diocesan priests feel called to be missionaries, and bishops should be open to sending them. And here it's talking about areas that lack priests. In the U.S., we often talk about the lack of priests in the U.S. I'm sorry to break it to you, those of you who are Canadian American. I don't know other countries, but we have an abundance of priests compared to other parts of the world. If you look at priests per million people, we have many more. If you look at how many how many parishioners there are per priest, we have many fewer than places like South America, places like Africa, and things like that. And so we shouldn't say, okay, we have less priests than we might have had per million Catholics a few years ago. Or sometimes the challenge is also here that this small town has really shrunk because the few industries here got automated, and now it's impossible to maintain this parish, and that's unfortunate reality. But that's not necessarily the dearth of priests. That can be demographic factors completely unrelated to the church. If all of us, if 75 years ago you needed 400 people to farm these fields, and now you need 30, well, there's going to be less people in that area because that's how many people need to farm the fields. There's not other things for people to do to pay the bills in that town, really. And that's not necessarily a problem. That's a challenge for the church, not necessarily a problem. The church is not responsible for that. And we have to think about that when we talk about things like how we talk about the dearth of priests. There is really a decent amount of priests per Catholic in the U.S. Yes, I would love that it would be higher. I think all of us would love that we had twice as many priests in the U.S. But to think of the U.S. as having lacking priests when compared to the rest of the world is simply not true. You can look at the fact book from the Vatican, things like that, and you will very clearly see this. And you look at the videos you'll see of events there, and it's much higher. And as well, in a lot of those countries, you will often also have a higher percentage of Catholics who are practicing than you do in Canada, the U.S., Europe, things like that. So that's important. And here we have great missionaries. I think there's a great example of this. Father Stanley Rother, who was going occasionally to Guatemala to do missions with people from his area. I think it's Nebraska. If I'm off a little bit, it could be wrong. And Father Stanley eventually decided to go full-time to Guatemala with permission of his bishop and was a missionary there in Guatemala where he was needed. Eventually, he was killed. And it's a great thing. And so that is important. Those are the kind of things that we want to promote. There's a cause, beatification, canonization, open for Father Stanley Rother. I'm not sure exactly where it is. He's not blessed or saint as far as I understand. So then here we can coordinate with other bishops, and that can be a good thing for the church. Now, moving on to F, bishops' conferences should support missions. Let's read it. F, in their own conference, the bishops should deliberate about dedicating to the evangelization of the nations some priests from among the diocesan clergy. They should also decide a definitive offering each diocese should be obliged to set aside annually for the work of the missions in proportion to its own budget. They should consider how to direct and control the ways and means by which missions receive direct help. They should deal with assisting and, if need be, founding missionary institutes and seminaries for diocesan missionary clergy and promoting close relations between such institutes and the diocese. I think this is fairly straightforward. It's taking what we were talking about in the past paragraph about the bishop and talking about it as at the level of the bishop conferences. We need bishops' conferences to be dedicated to evangelization, to think of, okay, how are we going to send priests to be missionaries? How are we going to do that? What are we going to do for funding? How are we going to organize a seminary for missionary priests or start a community for missionary priests or things like that? And that is an important aspect to think about at that level, because the bishop's conference is going to have the individual contact, like a bishop might, where he finds the sick people who are going to pray for missions. That is something the bishop's conference can promote more generally, but at that level, you're not going to have the individual contact a pastor or bishop would have. So hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully we do have a lot more of this missionary zeal, because this, unfortunately, is one of the areas where I think the council is being least implemented. We have this great call to go out and be missionaries, and unfortunately, a lot of things happened, and this really wasn't put into place as the Council Fathers asked us to. So our last subparagraph, 38G, talks about we should have missionary to migrants, including non-Catholics. Let's read it. G, it also pertains to the Episcopal conferences to found and promote works for brotherly reception and due pastoral care of those who immigrate from mission lands for the sake of studying or finding work. For through them, faraway peoples are sometimes made near, and an excellent opportunity is offered to communities which have long been Christian to converse with the nations, which have not yet heard the gospel, and to show them in their own dutiful love and aid the genuine face of Christ. I think for those of us in the U.S., and Canada, this is a great area to be missionaries, because we can be missionaries without going to the other side of the world. The U.S. and Canada are having a decent number of immigrants, both from historically Catholic countries like Latin America, and historically not, or the Philippines, and historically not Catholic countries like China or Indonesia or India or places like that. And we have this great opportunity to evangelize to them. We are not here to be nationalists, say, oh, we're going to forget about. No, these people are here. We can argue the exact policy, how many immigrants should be let in or things like that. That's not necessarily, there's not an absolute rule for that in Catholicism. But the idea here that once they are here, we have a duty to evangelize, and we have a duty to bring them to the gospel, to bring the gospel to them, and hopefully bring many of them to know, love, and serve Jesus. That is really a mission that we can take on in our daily lives, in the places that we are, at least for most of my listeners who are places like Canada and the U.S. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarCrest Bruce and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly to join the StarCrest Patreon. Tomorrow we will continue with the next paragraph of Ad Gentes, which is paragraphs, which is 39 and 40 on the task of priests and religious and evangelization and missions. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, like playlists of individual documents and a reading plan, to go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.